Giving you originality. Just a shot if you respect and love the quality. Listen good and pay attention to my clarity. All of the girls them say them love my personality. Me go offering a me love my nationality. Me love the money but me not bow to vanity. Me see the fussy them a come with animosity.
Pressure me, but we're not gonna go with sanity.
Gonna fire upon a poop and miss a faggoty. Cocky the young so feel
Feel under dirty.
so bend up and a rinse on the agony. Hope and fish out and knock a yacht man philosophy. Tell the shot of them full of solidarity. Tell the government free up the weed policy. How a country them free
we make we manage it.
Trick we and them kill we with reverse
psychology, That was my man Bounty Killer and Baby Sham, that old school reggae. All right, folks. So I want to talk to you guys real quick about addiction and addictive behaviors. People, a person who's addicted is not necessarily weak or morally corrupt or depraved. Addiction, when a person is addicted to something, we got to understand this, right? That they are the person. Look, first we have to disassociate out the person from their body. You have to be able to distinguish the person from their body. I'll say it again. The person is not their body. You are not your body. Okay? You are not your body. That must be first made abundantly clear. So when a person is addicted, the person themselves, the being, the vital life force, the prana that the person is captive, held captive or held hostage by their anatomy or their biology. I'll say that again. The life force, the vital life force that makes me, that animates me and you, is being held captive and taken hostage by the carnal nature, which is the biology, which is the anatomy. So a person who's addicted to any substance or any element is not necessarily weak or morally depraved or anything of that, or to be characterized that way. What happens when a person becomes addicted to anything or any person? It's a result that is directly correlated and manipulated by what's called the reward circuitry of the brain, or the reward pathway, which this pathway entails the VTA, the ventral tegmental area, the striatum, and as well as the nucleus accumbens. Scientists have done experiments via animals, rats, rodents, and they found that by stimulating the nucleus accumbens, specifically the nucleus accumbens, which is located in the VTA, the neurotransmitter, it's a neurochemical, dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, is sent to the prefrontal lobe and throughout the CNS, your central nervous system, your spinal cord, and allows you to feel incredible pleasure. And that pleasure is also considered a positive reinforcement, so that that behavior will be repeated. I'll say that again. When a person stimulates themselves with an opioid or opioid, which is the unnatural opioid, which is a synthetic version of an opioid that's naturally found in the brain. You have, I mentioned this in the previous videos, you have endogenous opioids and you have exogenous opioids, which are outside of the brain, and you have endogenous, which are within the brain. So you have organic and inorganic, synthetic. And so based off experiments with animals as well as with humans, we as a species, as an organism, we practice behavioral reward, positive reinforcement behavioral habits. So when, for instance, when you experience food, right, the satisfaction of food, the brain positively reinforces that you got this food at this location, right? Wherever you got the food or the nurturement or the comfort, wherever you found that as a species, your brain has a mechanism which positively reinforces the feeling you have, and then it without your knowing or doing, your brain on its own will always remember where you were when you got this feeling, what you were wearing when you got this feeling, and it will remember the environment and everything about that environment so that you can repeat that behavior. So pleasure feelings provide positive. These pleasurable feelings provide positive reinforcement, so that your behavior will be repeated. They did with mice. Scientists did an experiment where the mice would press on a lever, and they had a needle with an electrical stimulant that directly goes into the nucleus accumbens. Again, the nucleus accumbens is the reward spot in the brain. It's responsible for all the pleasurable feelings you feel. The nucleus accumbens, and the pathway, the circuitry is the VTA, ventral tegmental area, nucleus accumbens, and striatum. All three of these are in the prefrontal lobe. But these are the areas that allows us to feel pleasure and positively reinforces these pleasures. And the positive reinforcement is so that our behavior will be repeated, okay? Because this is how we're wired. This is in our DNA. This is us as organisms, as species. So, an addictive behavior is fashioned and molded in this way by repeatedly stimulating the nucleus accumbens. And as I was mentioning before, they did an experiment where they had the mice push on a lever. And every time the mice pressed on the lever, it would give him a small electrical jolt to the nucleus accumbens, and the mouse will continue to press the lever. So every time he pressed the lever, he gets a electrical stimulant to his nucleus accumbens, which releases the chemical dopamine that gives the pleasure, and it will positively reinforce that behavior, and he will continue to press the lever and press the lever and press the lever. And they found that the mouse would do so until exhaustion. The mouse will, in other words, the mouse continue to orgasm or to experience that pleasure until exhaustion. And what that tells us is that as human beings, when we become addicted to a substance or a person, that's the danger. We could become addicted to people. When you become addicted to a substance, you are no longer in control. Your thought process, your thought pattern, the pattern in which you come to logical decisions, conclusions, how you formulate your critical thinking is blurred. It is blurred and hijacked and overridden by the neurotransmitters, which is the neurochemical dopamine. It is actually, your thought process is actually overridden, hijacked, and taken hostage to the neurotransmitter dopamine. And not just dopamine, there are other neurotransmitters, endorphins, serotonin, which makes you feel good as well. So a person who has repeatedly used a substance and stimulated the nucleus accumbens to secrete and release the dopamine will continue to do that, because every time they experience the pleasure, again, the pleasure reward serves as a positive reinforcement. So the pleasure that you're experiencing reinforces that behavior. And then we see what's called tolerance. Now, tolerance is obviously a person no longer receives the same stimulant or pleasure from the initial dose that they were the initial intake of that dose. So what they have to do is up the dose to receive the same pleasure that they received initially. So tolerance is when you're no longer, receiving the pleasure from that initial dose. You need to increase that dose to get that initial pleasure you first received. And tolerance is a result of when you overstimulate the opioid receptor, because they're opioid receptors. When the opioid receptors become overly stimulated, there's an enzyme that adapts the opioid receptor to the dosage. So in other words, the opioid receptor becomes adapted as a result of an enzyme to the dosage, and therefore it mitigates the pleasure. It reduces the pleasure because of the adaptation of the opioid to that dosage. So what you need to do is, again, to increase that dosage so that opioid receptor can stimulate the VTA and the nucleus accumbens and the prefrontal lobe and the CNS, and then you can get that feeling again. So people are not necessarily weak or morally depraved when they're addicted. You have to remember that your biology is disassociated and distinguished from you, the person. And if your biology, your chemical, your neurochemical neurotransmitters become overly stimulated, or if they become if they become, you know, as a result of repetitive experiences, if they become accustomed or inveterate to a certain element that stimulates the reward pathway of the brain, the neurotransmitters, then that person is going to be manipulated by their biology. They're going to be manipulated by their anatomy. They're going to be manipulated by the reward pathway and the reward circuitry of the brain. And this, my friends, has nothing to do with the person per se. Again, you have to first come to the transparency and understanding of a disassociation and a distinguishing between the person and their body, their anatomy. Your body is a separate entity from you as a person. Your body is the host to who you are. You are the guest within the body that's the host. So you have to understand that in order for you not to become addicted, in order for you not, there's a saying, prevention is better than cure. It's better to prevent an element or an ailment than to try to figure out the cure for it. So obviously that's in the perfect world. People are going to make mistakes. People are going to, things happen. So we're not going to beat anyone up. But your best methodology is to prevent yourself from becoming addicted. So you prevent yourself from using any substances that can lead to addiction. And remember, addiction is not necessarily your will. Your will has been taken hostage by your biology, because your brain has its own mechanisms that reinforces the feeling that it experienced, and then cajoles you or goads you to repeat that behavior. Okay, if you study behaviorism, classical conditioning, any of these different psychologies, you'll understand and see what I'm saying. So, again, best methodology is prevention, better than the cure. But should you fall victim to this, it's important to understand how, first of all, the science behind it is first, so you can have a chance. And then second, weaning yourself off of any kind of opioid, because again, the brain has its own opioids, right? And I named a few of them. Dopamine is the most potent opioid that's in the brain. Adrenaline, endorphin, serotonin, oxytocin, just to name a few. And then, like I said, you have opioids, which are exogenous, which are outside of the brain, which are, found in laboratories, manufactured, artificially manufactured, heroin, cocaine. All of these are opioids. And so should you find yourself addicted to anything? And here's the thing, folks. When I say people, I mean in the sense of relationships. Relationships trigger the VTA. Relationships trigger the ventral tegmental area, which is the pleasure reward circuitry of the brain. It triggers the nucleus accumbens. It triggers the prefrontal lobes. It triggers the striatum. So relationships also spurs and encourages these neurochemical transmitters throughout the brain. Okay, and gives you that good feeling. But like I said, what we need to understand in terms of, like, this is why when you get into relationships, you have to be mindful of that your body, again, is not you and has its own attachments. So you're psychologically, you could be disattached. I don't know if I can say disattached. I think you can say that, but whatever, you get what I'm saying. Psychologically, you could be disconnected. There you go. You can be disconnected from someone. But physically, there's an attachment. And I'm sure we all know what we're talking about. Mentally, you'd be like, oh, I don't like this person. But physically, you're attracted to them. Psychologically, you don't like her. But physically, you're attracted to her. And so that is a example of what I mean when I say you're not your body. Psychologically, mentally, you can be totally disconnected from someone, but physically you're attracted to them. You're attached, right? So the body has its own mind, so to speak, or its own mechanisms that works independent of your cognitive and your cognition, right? It works independent of anything of your your mental faculties. Your body works independent of your mental faculties, and that right there is an interesting discovery in and of itself. So you have to be able to understand the body and how it works and how to discipline it, right? You have to learn how to discipline the body, and I always tell people meditation. When I said before how to wean yourself off if you do find yourself addicted to anything or anyone, if you can find time and learn to meditate, and meditate is something that you have to learn, because a lot of people think meditation is just sitting around thinking. Meditation is not thinking. Meditation is the opposite of thinking. Meditation is actually slowing down the thinking process, actually. So you're not really thinking when you're meditating. When you're meditating, you're going into the fifth dimension. We exist in the four dimensions, right? Time, space, time continuum. You read about that. We're four dimensional. But when you meditate, you're going to fifth dimension. You're going to different layers. You're going into different realms, and you're actually pulling and drawing from the source of all life, the source of all life, which is universal consciousness, which is God. I call it, you can call it whatever you want. I call it God. You're actually pulling from the source, the life source of God. And that source is a universal consciousness. And when you meditate, you're actually tapping into another level of what's called super consciousness. You have consciousness, subconsciousness, and super consciousness. When you start meditating, you're going into a higher frequency. You're tapping into a much more profound, profundity, in-depth dimension. And you're actually pulling information, which is your power. You're pulling power from the invisible realm or the parallel realm or the alternate universe, whatever, again, however you want to describe it. And when you do that, that right there brings the body into subjection. In the Bible, Paul talks about bringing his body into subjection. So when you do that, you're actually bringing the anatomy, the biology, everything I just discussed, you bring it into subjection. And subjection just means you bring it into balance. That's all that means. You bring balance to your biology. And therefore, you're able to regulate and to mediate and to just to control your urges, your instincts, your impulses a little bit better, or a lot better. And so disciplining and self-control of the body is how you keep these neurotransmitters, these neurochemicals, which are all natural. We're not saying to dehumanize yourself. These things are all natural, and they're part of our evolution and very necessary to our survival. And we're not condemning them, and we're not, penalizing. We're just saying that we don't want to let them ruin our lives, because they do have the potential to do so should they run amok or be unbridled, right? They we see the violence in the world every day in the streets. People are very high strung, turned up, as they would say, and sometimes you need to turn down. There's a song, "Turn Down for What?" Well, because if you turn up too damn much, you could end up in some real shit. You know what I'm saying? You could really destroy your life. You turn up too much. There's a lot of people who turned up, and they turned up somewhere dead. They turned up and turned up dead. So sometimes turn down for what? So that you could preserve life. You could go home to your family, take care of your wife, your children, your kids, your business, your manly responsibilities. So, again, like I said, just, I hope this video was informative about, our biology and how we're distinguished from the biology and how we are to discipline the biology, and, just being aware of how the brain functions, how the brain works, and that your brain can go into overdrive and it can manipulate and take over the vital force, which is your entity, your spirit force that is residing in this thing we call the flesh, corporal body. So till next time, y'all. You know what I'm gonna be doing? Cooking books, bringing information. Peace.
matter what the world may say, out the street, must have this survive won't
Accept defeat. Oh my God, when you come to Jesus. To say you're not alone now. It's not an easy road. Now them see the glamour and the glitter, so them think I better rose. But who feels it knows. Ooh, Lord, help we sustain these blows. I cry.